Holy moly, Knicks fans, that was too much. So, my other recent videos have been reacting to the X-Men, but this is a channel that's also going to focus on sports. And as a die-hard Knicks fan, it's probably I wish I could have given you some reactions from some of the other games in this series against the 76ers. This series got to me and got me more emotionally involved and pulled in than any series I can think of in the past 15 to 20 years. This series was intense, was a gut-wrenching barn burner of a series with too many ups and downs. Very, very frustrating near the end. But they came out with the win. I'm going to try my best to keep it PG. You might notice my voice might be a little raspy. They kind of turned me into a maniac tonight. So, not sure where to start. I'm going to try and give you a straightforward recap of the series for now, and then work from there with filling in some of the details. So, the Knicks and the Sixers, 2 seed versus 7 seed. The Knicks worked hard this year and got a number 2 seed, but the East was packed very, very tightly. And all of the top 8 seeds were teams that were 7 or 8 games over 500. Even the 7 and the 8 seed, Philly and Miami, were dangerous, at least until Miami, Jimmy Buckets went down with an injury and was out for that series. Had Miami had Butler in their series against Boston, that is a competitive series. Instead, Boston wins in 5. But as far as the Knicks and the 76ers, the Knicks fortunately have home court advantage in the series. Game 1 is close down the stretch. Josh Hart makes a bunch of three-pointers, including down the stretch, and helps them pull that game out. So, Game 1 at the Garden goes well. Game 2 at the Garden is a bit of an up-and-down affair. They lead 90-82 with about 6 or 7 minutes to go, and Philly goes off on a 19-6 run, something like that, and the 76ers lead by 5 with, well, they led by 4 with about 28 seconds left, and they have 2 free throws. Kyle Lowry at the line makes 1, misses 1. Lead is 5. Knicks now are down to their final possession. They pass the ball around. They find Jalen Brunson. Brunson had been limited very well by very strong Philly defense in the first 2 games, and he's able to get a corner 3 off. It hits the front rim. It goes straight up in the air and drops in. Very lucky bounce. 2-point game. Philly goes to inbound. They try to find Tyrese Maxey right in front of the inbounder, and Maxey kind of flails his arms as the ball comes to him, and it's not clear that, I didn't think he flailed his arms like he was being fouled. I'm not sure what happened to him. Maybe he was fouled. But the ball popped up in the air. Maxey was able to go up and get it, but then he fell to the ground, and Josh Hart is reaching for the ball while he's on the ground. Philly's trying to call timeout. Nick Nurse is calling timeout. There's another Philly player on the court trying to call timeout. Referees saw it, looked at it, didn't call it. Maybe because they felt that there wasn't clear possession. But Josh Hart is able to wrestle the ball free and pass the ball around. Finds an open Dante DiVincenzo for 3 and the lead. No good. Offensive rebound. Isaiah Hartenstein gets it, falling down. Passes out to a teammate. He passes to DiVincenzo. Another open look. Got it. Knicks lead by 1. So that frantic sequence, which, if you're a Knicks fan and you're watching this, I'm sure you've seen a bunch of times. It was TNT. I don't know if that was Iron Eagle or if that was somebody else. I don't think Iron Eagle had the call on TNT. It was somebody else, and it wasn't Kevin Harlan either. Mike Breen had the call on MSG. Much stronger call. He gave it the double bang. So it felt special watching that on MSG. But now 13 seconds left. Plenty of time. Philly gives the ball to Tyrese Maxey. Maxey can move like the road runner. He's going 60 miles an hour. How do you stop that? The Knicks are only up by 1 point. There's 13 seconds. There's all this time. Maxey goes straight to the basket on a beeline. But Hartenstein is there. He was ready for it, and he blocked it up against the backboard. Knicks get that rebound. They get fouled. It looks like they're going to win, but there's still time. So they go to the line. They make 2 free throws. They're up by 3. Philly calls timeout. There's like 4 seconds left. They have a chance to tie it with a 3. And I think they got it to Maxey. He got crowded. He had to pass it out to Embiid for a long corner 3. At the gun, no good. Knicks win by 3. One of the most dramatic victories I've ever seen the Knicks have. So at that point, we were calling it the reverse Reggie Miller because famously, in 1995, I had to deal with this as a kid. The Knicks are playing the Indiana Pacers in a second round series, game 1 at Madison Square Garden, and they had managed to get to a 6-point lead with 18 seconds left. That game had been put away. Indiana inbounds, they're down 6. What can they do? They get it to Reggie, immediate 3-pointer good. Now, this is ancient history. Most of you already know about this, but I'm just refreshing it in case you don't know, in case you're younger. After he hits a 3, it's a 3-point game. Reggie, while the Knicks are trying to inbound, runs up behind Greg Anthony, a short Knicks guard who was the first and easiest option to inbound the ball to. And he kind of shoves him and then dances back a little bit like, I didn't do it. Greg Anthony's on the ground. Anthony Mason, who is not the most fleet of foot, is inbounding. And suddenly he sees that the guy he wanted to throw to is on the floor. He's losing his balance. He has to inbound to somebody. And he throws it right to Reggie. And Reggie takes a dribble, steps back behind the 3-point line, puts up an off-balance 3, and makes it, and the game's tied. So that was a nightmare, and that wasn't even the end of it. So the Knicks inbound again to John Starks, and somebody on the Pacers, maybe it was Antonio Davis, somebody didn't realize the Pacers had tied the game. He thought they were still behind and they needed to foul. So he intentionally fouls Starks. Boneheaded play. Starks goes to the line. He admitted years later he was very shaken up by what had just happened. You just make 1 free throw, you're still back in the lead. You make 2 free throws, you're back in business. But Starks bricks both free throws. Then the second free throw comes out and the rebound is loose and it gets in the hands of Patrick Ewing, and Ewing's 4 feet away in traffic, and he goes back up to put it back in, and it hits the back rim and bounces out, and now Reggie Miller gets his hands on the rebound, and he's immediately fouled by the Knicks when he shouldn't have been, because that's just going to send him to the line. He was 94 feet from the basket, and now with about 8 seconds left, Reggie has 2 free throws, one of the greatest free throw shooters in NBA history, and that's a piece of cake for him. He makes them both. Now Pacers up by 2. The Knicks still have a chance. They inbound. They have to go the length of the floor because they have no timeouts. And I believe Greg Anthony dribbles up, slips, loses his balance before he can get the ball to Ewing or whoever he wanted to get the ball to. I think he got the ball to Charles Smith. By the time he got the ball to Charles Smith, time had run out, and Smith took an errant shot after time ran out, and it got blocked by the Pacers anyway. And the Pacers run around celebrating. That was quite possibly the biggest choke job in NBA playoff history, and it was by the Knicks on their home floor. The crowd was shocked, and Reggie Miller, who had already become an all-time villain at the Garden, is running around celebrating, saying the Knicks choked. The year before that, Reggie had scored 25 points in the fourth quarter to beat us. We still managed to win the series somehow, but dear God, I hated him. So that's the little recap on why this was the reverse Reggie Miller. That was 8 points in 8.9 seconds. This was 6 points in something like 9 or 10 seconds also, and it won the game. Knicks go up 2-0 on a very tough Philly team. They're in business. They probably shouldn't have won the second game, but now they're up 2-0. They got breathing room. So they go into Philly, and It's even for the first half, but Embiid starts draining three after three after three. He's also making dirty plays, like he falls down on one end and grabs Mitchell Robinson by the ankle and pulls at him and trips him up. And Mitchell Robinson's limping the rest of the game. And so Embiid is called for a flagrant foul. A lot of Knicks fans wanted it to be a flagrant 2. I can live with it being a flagrant 1, but if they call it a flagrant 2, he's out of the game and he can't go on a 50-point performance. So that pissed a lot of people off. But they call it a flagrant 1. I can't kill the refs for that. At least they called it a flagrant and they recognized it as an act that shouldn't have happened. But then you got to stop them. I don't think the league really wants to take the superstars out if they can help it. So for it to be a flagrant 2, it has to be really egregious for him. If the Knicks really didn't want him scoring 50 that game, they should have done something different. But he was just a marksman from 3 that game. And that was an aberration. And the Knicks got run out of the building. So, Game 4, afternoon game on ABC. That was a nip and tuck contest. Early on, the 76ers had a big 13 or 14 point lead on the Knicks. And the Knicks kind of came back. And they were not making their shots early on. Jalen Brunson really carried them that game. Just like Embiid dropped 51 on them in Game 3, Jalen Brunson scores 47 in Game 4. And that game came down to the wire, but the Knicks were narrowly able to hang on and put it away in Philly to go ahead 3-1. It was a really jubilant, satisfying feeling. Then Game 5. Game 5 started off very rough for the Knicks, but it also started off rough for the 76ers. The Knicks fall behind by 9 or 10 in the first quarter because they can't make a shot. Philly can't make a shot, but eventually figures out how to make a shot. The Knicks do come back and make it a game because I feel like no matter what you do to the Knicks, or no matter how poor they shoot, they're never out of it because they are constantly jumping on top of you for offensive rebounds. That's been a hallmark of the Knicks in this series. They continue to do that and outwork the 76ers on the offensive glass, and it pays dividends. And the coolest thing to watch is Josh Hart. He's 6'4". He's a guard who thinks he's a forward. And in Game 4, when Brunson was scoring 47 points, Hart did not have a field goal. I think he might have had 4 points all off free throws. But he blocked shots, he grabbed rebounds, he was everywhere. He made a difference at the end of that game. And a big part of why Brunson's 47 points was able to make the difference is because the Knicks completely shut down the 76ers from scoring any points in the final 5-6 minutes of that game. It was crazy how efficient the Knicks were on defense. Or if you're a 76ers fan, I'm sure you're saying, why couldn't they hit the broadside of the barn? But there were a lot of blocked shots. There was a lot of real tenacious defensive plays made there, at least from what I saw. A lot of times it feels like it's a combination of, well, they made good defensive plays and also we missed shots we should have made. So anyways, in Game 5, the Knicks, again, slow start. That was a reoccurring trend for the Knicks. They battle back, and as the fourth quarter winds down, they make the plays they need to get to a 6-point lead. Now, they were up 5. OG Anunoby got a steal. He drives to the basket, has a clean look, and dunks it. And that put them up 7 in the final minute, and I celebrated. They won this game. And I was very confused because they called Anunoby back not to shoot one free throw. I didn't even realize he was fouled. But for some reason, they called a foul before the dunk. And I didn't see a foul before the dunk. I didn't understand why that was called. I thought the dunk should have counted. And then don't worry, I didn't even care if he was fouled. Instead, they wave off the dunk and they make him shoot free throws. And I felt like nobody really talked about this, but it bothered me because he then ends up making 1 of 2 free throws. So instead of being up 7, you're up 6. And I thought the foul's completely... I didn't see one. And it's rare that you're going to complain that Philly shouldn't have fouled your team or shouldn't have gotten called for a foul on your team. But this was a foul call that, in theory, goes in favor of the Knicks, but it works to hurt them. So now you're only up 6, but you're still up 6. There's 28 seconds left. And there was already a game that had a turnaround like this earlier in the series. These are not things that are just supposed to happen on a regular basis. Tyrese Maxey takes the inbounds and dribbles right up and fires a 3. And he pump fakes Mitchell Robinson, so Mitchell jumps up and fouls him. And he gets a 3 off, and it goes in. And suddenly, it's a 3-point game. And he gets to shoot the free throw, and he makes the free throw, and it's a 2-point game. Then they foul Josh Hart. Josh Hart makes 1 of 2, so it's a 3-point game. Philly inbounds, they get it right to Maxey. Maxey dribbles right up to the logo and fires a 35-foot shot that goes right in and ties the game. And that's with about 8 seconds left. The Knicks have no timeouts. They get it to Brunson. Brunson drives to the basket. He tries to drive baseline, and he's blocked by Embiid or Batum or one of the big guys out of bounds, and time runs out, and they go to overtime. So it felt to me like the miracle victory they got in Game 2, they gave right back in Game 5. And when Maxey hit the last 3, he went crazy. He's screaming at everyone in the Garden, and I'm screaming at my TV set at Maxey. I feel like there's something about being an opposing star player, or especially a guard that can get hot, to go to the Garden in a playoff series and step in and be the villain, like Reggie Miller. Trae Young, 3 years ago, same thing. And Trae Young got to play the villain, shut us down in 5 games, and to this day still has fans chanting, "Fuck Trae Young." Excuse my French, but that's a direct quote from Knicks fans. So now this time it was Tyrese Maxey's turn, and he had 46 points that game. He was unstoppable, but he had to get 7 points in the last 30 seconds to force an overtime. And then in the overtime, the Knicks immediately jump out to a 5-point lead courtesy of Jalen Brunson. They start the overtime. He hits a 3. They get a stop. He drives to the basket for a layup. They're up 102-97. So now there's another lead you can squander. Of course, 4 minutes is a lot more time than 28 seconds. But I had this feeling, you just blew the 6-point lead. You got a 5-point lead. There's too much time on the clock. Are you sure you're going to be able to salt that away? Well, Philly really didn't shoot the ball very well. Some of it was Knicks defense, but a lot of it, Philly missed a lot of shots that were makeable. And I feel like if they play Indiana, and Indiana has guys that are in rhythm a little better, they're going to have trouble. But Philly played the Knicks back and forth, took some possessions, they missed some shots, but they stopped the Knicks from that point on. And okay, 5-point lead, now it's 3. Now it's down to 1. Now Philly has a lead. Now Philly's up 3. Now Philly's up 4. The Knicks were just completely shut down for those 3.5 minutes in the middle of the overtime. And then finally, Brunson drives to the basket, and he's fouled hard by Embiid. Just kind of a slap in the face, caught him in the eye. They reviewed it. They gave him the flagrant. Okay, Knicks have a path back into the game. There's a minute left. He goes to the line. Now, Brunson's really been frustrating me with his free throw shooting. He's a very good free throw shooter in the regular season. He's been shaky at the line. He's been tremendous in the series, but he was shaky at the line. And he missed one of the 2 free throws on the flagrant, where you really need every point. You're in the final minute, you're down 4. He misses one, he makes one. Now they have the extra possession because it's a flagrant. They find Brunson. He makes the 3 to tie the game. So now you're a minute to go. They're back in this. But it felt like defensively, the Knicks breathed this big sigh of relief, and they allowed somebody on Philly, I don't know if it was Cameron Payne or somebody, to just get right under the basket and lay it up. If I'm pausing for a second, it's because the return feed on the video is frozen. I'm not sure if I'm live anymore. or if this is going to unfreeze itself and catch up with real time, but it's thrown me off for a second. I'm going to keep talking just in case. So, you know what? Let me pause it just to make sure. Okay, no, we're back live again. My hopefully that isn't just a still frame with audio. But so Philly got a layup right under the basket they shouldn't have. It was lackadaisical Knicks defense. Even that layup bounced on the rim 2 or 3 times when it should have been a gimme. So that drops in. Now the Knicks are down 2. They get 2 more possessions with a chance to tie the game or take the lead, and they turn them both over. One of them, Brunson, is out on the perimeter looking to take a 20-foot shot. Batum comes in, and Batum's taller, and he puts his arm out, and Brunson in midair realizes he's not going to get the shot off. He's going to get blocked. So he changes his mind and goes to pass to a teammate that isn't there. And that pass goes whizzing out of bounds. And that felt like the turnover that really buried them. Because now Philly has the ball. You have to foul them because there's not enough time to get a stop. They make free throws. Now you're down 3. Or maybe at that point they were down 2 and the free throws put them down 4. So now they're down 2 possessions. They couldn't score and they end up having a foul. They lose by 6 in the overtime. And the other thing that I noticed about that overtime and about what I described is that the Knicks scored 9 points in the OT session, and all of them came from Jalen Brunson. Nobody else on the team could make a basket that overtime. That's a big part of what killed them, but none of it should have been necessary. If you hold the 6-point lead with 28 seconds left, then you're fine, and the series is over, and the Knicks win. So when they lose that game, you go into panic mode. You're like, well, Game 6 is in Philly. There's a good chance they don't win that game with the Philly crowd, and then you have a Game 7 back home in New York. So I was losing my mind screaming at the TV in Game 5. I know some people could say, well, it's karma for Game 2. And the funny thing is, Games 2 and 5 had one thing in common, which is the last 2-minute report indicated that on these deciding plays, the 6 points the Knicks scored in the final seconds or the 7 points that Philly scored in the final seconds of their game, that they were calls that went against there were calls the referees should have made that would have changed the outcome. In Game 2, they determined after the fact that Tyrese Maxey was fouled twice on the erratic inbounds pass that the Knicks ended up getting to turn into the last 3. They also determined that Nick Nurse, Philly coach, called timeout and should have been granted the timeout. Now, I'm not sure he should have been granted the timeout because I don't think there was ever clear possession by Philly during any of that time. But that's what the 2-minute report said. And I really respect the NBA for having that. I think it's really a good way to check themselves, and they've done a good job of admitting sometimes we're at fault. Sometimes we could be better, and we want to try to put the best product on the court that we can, and we're always striving to do that. Of course, it feels like every time they do this, it frustrates a fan base that feels wronged, that, I wish I didn't know this. But they're doing their due diligence. So then Game 5's last 2-minute report comes out and says, Tyrese Maxey's 4-point play shouldn't have counted because he traveled on the play. Now, I didn't think it was an egregious travel. It was a little bit of shuffling your feet to get space. James Harden does that all the time to get threes. Now, I don't like that the league lets Harden do it. I don't like that the league lets people travel as much as they do. But this was not an obvious, noticeable, egregious travel, and there was nobody in the arena or watching the game on TV who's yelling, Maxey traveled. That didn't happen. So I was angry that the Knicks allowed that to happen, and I was angry that Maxey was able to make the shots. But I wasn't sitting there killing. I don't think anybody was sitting there killing the refs for making those calls. And then there was a play in the overtime where there's a missed shot at the basket. Josh Hart sort of jumps out of bounds as the ball is careening out of bounds, and he appears to save it back in bounds to Isaiah Hartenstein. And Hartenstein gets it and has an opportunity to go up for a contested layup, but still right under the basket. But instead, the referee said, no, Hart was out of bounds. The play is dead. It's Philly ball. And the league said, no, Hart was in bounds. That shouldn't have been called. Now, that was a more obvious call. For some reason, nobody questioned it at the time. Maybe because it felt like the Knicks were being outplayed and they deserved to turn the ball over, and that was the mojo that was happening at the time. But and if they let the play continue, there's no guarantee the Knicks score on that play, even from close in, because of the tough defense and the big guys you have inside for Philly with Embiid. You can't guarantee. There were so many times in the series the Knicks get right to the basket and they're afraid to shoot. Maybe because they're afraid of Embiid blocking them or something, but it got very frustrating, including in Game 6, which I just finished watching, where you're passing out to open three-point shooters when you're under the basket, and your three-point shooters aren't knocking them down because the Knicks aren't a great shooting team right now. So I felt like, and this leads into Game 6, they should have shot the ball more. Or, I'm sorry, they should have shot the ball more when they're in the paint. So, that leads us into Game 6, which I just finished watching. Now, I have a party on Saturday night that I very much wanted to go to. But Game 6 tonight, Thursday night, 9 o'clock, if they lose in Philly, they play Game 7 on Saturday at 7 o'clock. And the party I'm going to isn't really a basketball party. It's not designed for that. And I would not really be able to get into watching that game. I probably wouldn't be able to do that party. I would need to be at a place where I could get completely fully invested in Game 7, whether I'm going to scream my guts out and be depressed and be furious or be thrilled or whatever I'm going to experience. I need to go through that. So, Game 7. No, not Game 7. Game 6. The Knicks play out of their minds in the first 6 to 8 minutes of the first quarter and build up a 33-11 lead. They tripled up on the 76ers. Now, I have watched Knicks basketball for a long time, and I feel like, and this happens in the NBA sometimes, but obviously there are a lot of playoff games that are blowouts. There really weren't any blowouts in the series except Game 3, which Philly won. When the Knicks went up by 22, you allow yourself to think, maybe they finally get a blowout win here. You should blow out the other team when you go up 22 points. I don't care if it's early in the first quarter, but this thing in my head, because I've seen this happen many times, is sometimes when you get the really big lead in the first quarter, it's almost like you run out of points early in the game, and then the other team not only comes back from the big deficit really quick, but then they run you out of the building, and then you end up getting blown out. And I don't understand how or why that happens with the frequency that it happens, but I've seen it happen to the Knicks many a time. In fact, I believe Game 6 against Miami, the game that the Knicks were eliminated last year, they got a pretty nice early lead in that game. Now, that turned out to be a very close game that went down to the last possession. So, but it feels like the early lead, even if it's 20 or 22 points, is the most unsafe lead. And I had that in my mind. I'm dreading that like, don't let that happen. You're up 33-11. Just keep pushing. And I felt like the Knicks still played with the same tempo and the same pace. They were still crashing the offensive boards and creating as many opportunities for themselves as they could, but they were also not scoring on them even when they're getting multiple possessions. They start turning the ball over. Philly starts finding their shot, and before you know it, it's a second quarter and they're losing. They blew a 22-point lead in about the length of a single quarter. And by the time it was halftime, they were losing 54-51, and I was screaming beside myself. So, get to the third quarter, and I start telling myself, just win this quarter, and maybe everything goes away. Maybe everything will be okay. But Philly continued to pour on. They still had the momentum in the early part of the third quarter, and the 3-point lead turned into a 10-point lead. And at that point, I shouted, "You were up 22. You're down 10. How do you let this happen?" And at that moment, it felt like it was just going to get worse and get worse and get worse. But this is a Knicks team with a lot of tenacity, and they might have a tough time making shots. They might turn the ball over, and they might bumble and stumble a little bit, but they're not going to quit, and they're not going to stop playing hard. And eventually, they kicked in and found a way to make the most out of their possessions, and they fought back from the 10-point deficit and got the game to an even dead heat 83-83 going into the fourth. And at that point, I felt a little better about our chances. But the way that game played out, because I could see the 22-point lead in the first quarter melting before my eyes, I couldn't watch or experience that game the way you would a normal game, because I'm living and dying on every possession from the first quarter on, because you can't blow this lead, because I feel like once it becomes an even game, Philly's got the crowd on their side. They have much better odds to win. That if you blow the lead, you're going to lose the game. So it was really felt that game like every possession from almost the beginning of the game is just a war, because you have this expectation that you were up 22 and you shouldn't lose the game. And now you're losing, and now you're behind, and now you're playing terrible, and everything's going wrong. And every Philly field goal, every break that goes their way reinforces that. And I'm kind of losing my grip on myself watching the game. But Knicks are able to settle down, and as the fourth quarter goes on, the Knicks take command. They take the lead to start out, and they jump ahead to a 7-point lead, an 8-point lead. They asserted themselves, and Jalen Brunson was doing most of the asserting. He was making most of the big plays in the fourth quarter. And one of the things that Philly fans have been really upset and unhappy about, and people watching the series have pointed out, is that Embiid was very dominant in the first 3 quarters of this game. He was dominant in a lot of stretches of this game. But when the fourth quarters came around, he would get tired. He would not be the same effective player that he was the rest of the game. And he continued to put up big numbers. I don't like the fact that he has this Draymond Green propensity for taking cheap shots at people. And he did that multiple times with the Knicks. He did that multiple times in Game 3. But he's a great player. And there were times in the third quarter where, even though I was screaming, getting so frustrated at Philly scoring, but there were possessions where they just gave it to Embiid, and he'd back his man down and get closer and closer and put up a 5-foot hook shot that would just go in with no problem. There's nothing I can be mad about. It's just couldn't figure out a way to stop him. Come up with a better way. And on those plays, you kind of just watch in silence, like, man, what do we do? But Embiid kind of did his usual disappearing act in the fourth quarter again. And the Knicks are able to jump out to an 8-point lead with 4 minutes to go, inside 4 minutes. And it looks, again, like they're finally going to put this away. But the remark I was making at this point is the whole series felt like you're watching the rubber band AI of a midway video game, whether it's NBA Jam or NFL Blitz. You take a big lead on a computer opponent in that game, or even a human opponent, and the game will magically find ways to make sure that person comes back. And it's so frustrating watching because it almost feels predetermined that nothing you can do will allow you to pull ahead and pull away for good and just put the game away. And that's what these games in the series felt like. And again, the Knicks were up 8 after they were up 22, and then they fell behind 10, and then they come back, and now they're up 8, and there's 4 minutes left. And you just went through this in Game 5 where you blew a 6-point lead in 28 seconds. And Philly comes right back, and before you know it, the Knicks are only up 1. And then before you know it, the game's tied because Maxey drives to the basket because he's a road runner, and he's going a million miles an hour, and he lays it up off glass so tightly that the only way you're going to block it is to goaltend it. And he pointed it out. He said, hey, that's a goaltend. And is really, really close, but I think he was right. I think it was a goaltending call, and the refs got that call right, and then he got fouled, so he went to the line, and that free throw tied the game up. So now, the Knicks, with all the ups and downs of that one game in a series with so many other ups and downs, they have one possession with the score tied, and they can do something about it to win the series. Of course, they do something. There's no guarantee you win the series. I said at that point, a made basket doesn't guarantee a win. I think at that point, they had 35 seconds on the clock at that point. And they inbound, they move the ball around. And Brunson is looking for a shot. It's not there. He's being covered. He gets it over to Josh Hart in front of the three-point line. And Hart is not in a rhythm at that moment, and he's looking to pass to someone. And he looks to his left, and he doesn't see anybody. And he looks in front of him. He's open for 3. I guess I'll just shoot this for 3. And I was kind of like, no! He swishes it. Puts the Knicks up 3 with just over 24 seconds to go. And because it didn't look like he was stepping into it confidently or in rhythm. He just looked like, well, I'm open. I might as well shoot it. He got it anyway. Those usually don't go down, but he didn't just make that. He swished it like a boss. So credit to Josh Hart. That ends up being the shot that wins the game, basically, but we didn't know that yet because there's still too much time, and the Knicks decided they're not going to let Maxey run around and get an open 3. They foul him right away. I was not sure of that at first because now you're playing the foul game. Now, a lot of Knicks fans were saying they should have fouled Maxey at the end of Game 5 so he couldn't have gotten his logo 3 off to tie the game. The reason I'm not crazy about that is when you foul right away, you leave all this time on the clock. And then, okay, Philly is making their free throws. They were incredible at the line this series. Embiid's a great free throw shooter. Maxey's a great free throw shooter. That is tough to beat them at. And the Knicks were not shooting their free throws very well this series. So Maxey goes to the line, makes both of his. Now it's a 1-point game. The Knicks inbound, and I'm trying to remember who ended up shooting the free throws. I think it went to Dante DiVincenzo. He got fouled, and he has to go to the line, and he's got to make both. Otherwise, now you're only up 2, and Philly can beat you with a 3. And the whole point of this foul game is that they're not supposed to gain any ground, but there's enough time that if they make theirs and you miss yours, they'll gain ground and they can still beat you. But DiVincenzo stepped up and he made both free throws. And then the 76ers inbound, the Knicks pressured them. And eventually they got some time off the clock and then they fouled. I think it was Maxey again. Maybe it was somebody else, but whoever they fouled, he went to the line, made both of his free throws. Then the Knicks get the ball. They foul Josh Hart. He's got to go to the line and make his. Otherwise, Philly has one last play, and Hart goes to the line, makes both of his. So now it's a 3-point game with 3 seconds left. Philly doesn't have any timeouts, and Philly is not able to get a real credible shot off, and the Knicks win. Finally. Thank God. So, had to share my thoughts with you on, or that long-ass recap, whatever. This was just too much. But I think the remarkable thing is that it felt like the Knicks were trying to beat Philly with 1 star, and Philly has 2 stars. Philly has Embiid, who is the natural dominant force, the most consistent player who's going to put up the most points throughout the series. But they also have Tyrese Maxey, who's a better player than I ever realized until the series. He won most, I think he got most improved player this year. And he was a good role player until recently. And this year, he's like a second star player. He can drop 40, 45 points. There's also instances where he can be really quiet. Maxey did not have a very good Game 6. He was quiet for most of the game. But the thing I forgot about in Game 6 is they took a guy named Buddy Hield off the bench. Buddy Hield did nothing for Philly, but he stepped out and he just killed it. He hit 3 after 3, and he racked up 20 points in a short period of time. And I'm like, what is going on? And it was adding to the fact that they were destroying the Knicks' 22-point lead, and now you're letting this bench warmer, this bum, this plumber, this guy that was doing nothing, and suddenly he's killing you, and that's going to be added on top of what everyone else does. And it just felt like you're fighting a battle you can't win. But eventually Hield cooled off in the second half, and the Knicks were able to restore order, but that was just another crazy thing in the craziness of the series. And suddenly it was like, what your last guy off the bench is now going to step in and kill us too? My God. So, but yeah, they were able to weather that entire storm, and they were able to win a series where Philly has 2 star players and the Knicks have 1, and the Knicks were able to beat them anyway because everybody else is there. It's very hard to figure out where you're going to find the scoring from other than Brunson. It's really a patchwork effort. Sometimes DiVincenzo's threes go in, sometimes they're air balls. Sometimes Hart can find some threes. Sometimes he can drive to the basket and get good shots in. Sometimes Hartenstein tries these awkward push shots from 10 or 12 feet, and they go in even though they look terrible. McBride has an awkward shot, but Deuce can be really clutch too. But you never know who's going to come through and who's going to look really bad not coming through. And it really is a patchwork effort. That's what I'm worried about for the Knicks going forward. They're going to play Indiana because Indiana closed out Milwaukee. Now, I'm glad we're not facing Giannis and Lillard and Chris Middleton. And that trio scares me. They're eliminated. I'm glad about that. But Indiana, less heralded team, Tyrese Halliburton, Pascal Siakam, they have a system that's getting them points, that's getting them playing very well. And they're going to be tough to beat too. And if they're knocking down their shots, now again, they're probably not going to knock down the same amount of shots against the Knicks that they did against Milwaukee because the Knicks are a very tenacious defensive team. They have the old school defense. It's Tom Thibodeau defense. And I really respect and appreciate that from the Knicks. But sometimes Philly shot the ball so badly in some of these games that it's hard for me to imagine other NBA teams shooting that badly, even with the Knicks playing that kind of defense. So we'll see. But then it also felt like when Philly would shoot badly, the Knicks would struggle to put together positive possessions, and they'd let Philly hang around like that. Now, early in Game 6, the Knicks did exactly what you always dream of them doing, and they hold Philly to bad shots, and they go back down, and they're scoring, and they're making good plays, they're getting to the basket, they're piling on the points, they're doing exactly what you dream of. And then they get to a point, and then, oh no, we reach the apex of our leap, and now we're falling like a stone. And now everything goes against them. And you wonder if the Knicks can put enough efficient possessions and quarters together to win against quality teams consistently. They were able to beat Philly, but it's going to be a very different look against Indiana. And realistically, I don't expect them to beat the Celtics. It would be great if they beat this. It would be great if they give the Celtics a series. But if they can beat Indiana and get to the Eastern Conference Finals against the Celtics and lose, I would be happy with that. I would respect that. I consider that a successful season, especially if they push the Celtics to 6 games. If they beat the Celtics, I'm over the moon. That is a dream that means we can win the finals. Now, if they have Denver in the finals, I know we beat Denver in the regular season a few times, but Denver knows exactly what they're doing. They're the new San Antonio Spurs. I don't think we beat Denver in a series. Just like I I really don't think we beat Boston in a series. But hey, Porzingis hurt himself. Jason Tatum kind of tweaked his ankle, but Boston still crushed Miami in Game 5. Games 3, 4, and 5, really. Boston's got a lot of firepower. There's going to be not enough answers for the Knicks. I think when the Knicks are completely healthy, they have Brunson and they have Julius Randle as a solid second option. Now, Randle's been really bad in the playoffs the last few years, 2021 and last year. So you don't know that a healthy Randle could be someone who you could be counted on. It felt like he was very reckless trying to drive to the basket a little out of control, and he couldn't always put the right kind of touch on the ball as he gets to the basket. He'd take rushed shots from the outside. They weren't falling. He'd turn the ball over. I know last year he was playing hurt in the playoffs, but I still wasn't sold that Randle is what you need in the playoffs. Maybe if you give it time, he will be, or maybe the Knicks trade him for a more reliably known commodity in the offseason. I know there's talks about Devin Booker. I'd like that, but I know Booker's not a defender. He scored 71 points once, though, so be hard to resist. But the identity of the team right now is this very physical, tenacious, never quit, never give up team that's really bought into the concept. Booker is a great scorer, but I don't think he has the tenacity. And the thing I love about Brunson is he is a scorer that has that tenacity. One thing I really respected from Brunson was after Game 5, I saw him at the post-game podium. He took responsibility for the failings at the end of regulation. And he said, I need to be more of a leader. We need to communicate better. We need to be more on the same page about how are we going to foul. Are we going to foul up 3 with Tyrese Maxey or not? Some of the turnovers in overtime, he blamed himself. And he was very patient with the questions being asked of him and really got into detail. So that told me that he has the right kind of mentality, accepts blame, and says, okay, look, we need to do better, and isn't going to get too hot-headed or too frustrated by the New York media or by any situation he's going to face. And I think the leadership that he showed really shined in the final moments of Game 6. He had so many huge games. I know Embiid had a lot of big games, but Brunson has the kind of big games where you know he can be counted on in the final minutes of the game, and that is what we needed. That is the dream that Knicks fans have been hoping for a very long time. It was really like, as a kid, I had the Ewing Knicks, and it was Ewing and Starks in the early 90s. And they had a lot of other pieces, but it was one superstar, Ewing, and his sidekick, John Starks. And Starks could have big nights sometimes, and he could also have off nights. Sometimes Derek Harper would step up, but none of these other guys were really stars. And that went on, and then they tried to get stars around him. They got Larry Johnson, they got Allen Houston, they got Chris Childs. And then, and that looked like that was going to work for a year and a half. And then when Ewing got hurt and got the wrist injury and started really looking old, because now he's got the Achilles and he's got the wrist and he's got the knees, and he's like a walking Frankenstein's monster. Not just because he had the flat top, but because there's all these body parts stitched together haphazardly. So they got more parts. They wanted to get younger. They traded Starks, which killed me, but they got Latrell Sprewell. They traded Oakley, which killed me, but they got Marcus Camby. And they got this whole new identity with this young blood. And Ewing wasn't the face of the team anymore. He wasn't your top scoring option anymore. But they had all these other ways they could beat you, and they could play fast and up-tempo. And the 99 Knicks somehow got to the finals, even when Ewing got hurt, but they ran into the Twin Towers. And that still is maybe my favorite playoff run of all time of the Knicks. Getting past Miami with Allen Houston's little bounce with 0.8 of a second left off the top of the backboard. And then getting past Indiana thanks to Larry Johnson's 4-point play in Game 3. Having an inspired Game 6 to close out at home and win the series. that was a thing of beauty. So I'm mentioning this. That is the Ewing era. And then the next year, they beat Miami in 7 games again, and get to the conference finals. They lose to Indiana. But every year, they are in the thick of it. They have Ewing. They have either Starks or Sprewell or somebody with Ewing to at least make them a contending team most of the time. Then they lose Ewing, and they go into a dark period. They traded Ewing for Glenn Rice in 2000, and Glenn Rice did not pan out to be the superstar they were hoping for. In 2001, they made the playoffs. They lose the first round to Toronto. Then they go into real decline. They become just a bad under 500 team for years. 02, nothing. 03, nothing. 04, they trade for Marbury midseason. They played just good enough to get to the playoffs. Swept by New Jersey, 4 games straight first round. Then they're bad in 05, 06, 07, 08, 09. Real dark periods. 2010, they're bad. But wait, they get Amare Stoudemire. They have a few young pieces. They trade it for Carmelo Anthony. Now, they mean business. They have Melo and Stoudemire. They get to the playoffs 2011. They get swept out of the first round by Boston. They have Jeremy Lin the next year. He takes over, but then he gets hurt. And then they lose in 5 to Miami. 2013, they're even better. They have Raymond Felton at point guard. He's getting the job done. They have a home court in the first round against Boston. They beat the Celtics. Second round against Indiana. They lose the first game at home. They can't win any of the games in Indiana. Roy Hibbert blocks Carmelo Anthony at the end of Game 6. They lose that series. And then these are the Carmelo Anthony Knicks. And they got to the playoffs 3 straight years, but then after that, 2014, 15, 16, they're not making the playoffs anymore. Melo leaves. They draft Porzingis. They can't do anything with Porzingis. He's hurt a lot. They go into decline again. And then it's not until the early 2020s where they have Julius Randle. That gets them to the playoffs, but no further. Now getting Jalen Brunson. After going through this gap with the Ewing era is a clear signpost. That was the last time the Knicks were reliably good. And then it was just this drought. And occasionally, okay, here's Starbury, that's cute, but you're not a winning team. Okay, you have Melo, you kind of get them a little bit further, but not really. They were never really a team that could have won a championship. And they have Randall, but it's still not enough. Brunson makes you feel like you're always in the game. And that's the thing that's exciting Knicks fans right now, is we have somebody that can always be counted on for a clutch bucket, even when he's already put up 40 or 41. I wish he would make his free throws a little more often in his playoffs right now, but hey, there's time for him to right himself because there's a whole new series. So, I can take a deep breath, can take Friday, Saturday off, unless I hope the league doesn't say, hey, you know what? Knicks are free, Pacers are free, let's start game 1 on Saturday instead of game 7. That can happen. I'm not sure about that, but a game 1 would be a much more relaxing thing than a game 7. And something goes wrong in game 1, I can usually live with it unless it's Reggie Miller's 8 points in 8.9 seconds. So I think I've talked myself out of this. We're almost an hour in. I'm very much relieved they won the game. I didn't get to spend much of it very happy because I was freaking out at the 22-point lead dwindling and falling to a minus 10. But somehow they righted the ship. Somehow everything's okay. And wanted to give my thoughts. I'm sure I'll be back with more videos about the way this series went and other details and aspects of it as things went on, and maybe more about the coming games and coming series. But that'll do it for now. It's late. The game started at 9. It's almost 1 in the morning. Have a good night, New York.